Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching ships from dozens of worlds dock at the massive space platform. The Galactic Military Academy floated in the void like a metal city, its towers reaching out in all directions. Ships shaped like crystals brought the Vorthak cadets. Long, sleek vessels carried the insectoid Zephyrians. Bubble-shaped craft held the aquatic deepers in their water tanks. Sarah pressed her face against the cool metal of the viewport. She was 22 years old, average height, with brown hair and dark eyes. Nothing special to look at, nothing that screamed elite military material. Yet somehow she had made it here. Human Cadet Chen. Report to Bay 7 for orientation, the ship's computer announced in a flat, mechanical voice. Sarah grabbed her single bag and made her way through the corridors. Other cadets moved past her and she tried not to stare. A Vorthak cadet caught her attention first. The being looked like a walking diamond, its body made of clear crystal that sparkled with inner light. Information flowed through its transparent form like liquid starlight. The Vorthak never forgot anything ever. Their minds were living computers. A group of Zephyrians clicked and chittered to each other in their hive speak. They moved as one unit, their forearms gesturing in perfect coordination. When one turned its head, the others did too. Their compound eyes caught every detail around them. In battle, a squad of Zephyrians fought like parts of the same machine. Sarah stepped aside as three Deepers walked by in their environmental suits. The suits were filled with the blue-green water of their homeworld. Through the transparent aluminum, she could see their streamlined bodies and gill slits. Deepers could work in any high-pressure environment. They were the galaxy's best deep space engineers. Bay 7 buzzed with activity. Hundreds of cadets from 47 different species filled the enormous space. Sarah had studied them all during her long journey here. The molten ones with their lava-hot bodies that could work in any furnace. The void dancers who lived in zero gravity and never touched solid ground. The quicksilvers made of liquid metal, who could reshape their bodies and think faster than light. "Welcome to the Galactic Military Academy," a voice boomed across the bay. Commander Srixtal stepped onto the central platform. The reptilian officer stood 3 meters tall, covered in green scales that looked like armor. Yellow eyes swept across the assembled cadets. Sarah had read about the commander during her trip. Srixtal came from a warrior species that had conquered half their galaxy before joining the Galactic Union. Their reflexes were legendary. "You are the best of your species," Commander Srixtal continued, his voice carrying easily across the vast space. "Each of you brings something unique to this academy. The Vorthak bring perfect memory. The Zephyrians bring perfect coordination. The Deepers bring perfect adaptation to pressure." The commander's eyes found Sarah in the crowd. She felt very small under that yellow gaze. "Some of you," he said, "bring advantages that are not immediately obvious." Was that meant for her? Sarah couldn't tell. "You will train here for 1 full cycle," Commander Srixtal announced. "You will study warfare, strategy, physics, and xenobiology. You will learn to work with species different from your own. Most importantly, you will be tested." A murmur went through the crowd. Everyone knew about the Academy's tests. They were legendary throughout the galaxy. "The final examination will separate the truly exceptional from the merely gifted," the commander said. "It will test not just what you know, but what you can become under pressure. Some of you will surprise yourselves. Others will discover that they have reached their limits." After the orientation, Sarah found her way to her assigned quarters. The room was small but functional, with a narrow bed, a desk, and a viewport showing the stars. She unpacked her single bag, hanging up her few spare uniforms. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. Sarah opened it to find her roommate, a Vorthak named Crystal That Holds Light. The being's name was actually a pattern of musical tones, but the translation system rendered it into something Sarah could understand. "You are the human," Crystal That Holds Light observed. Light patterns swirled through her crystalline body as she spoke. "I have been curious about your species." "Just Sarah," she said, stepping aside to let her roommate enter. "I have studied human physiology and psychology," Crystal That Holds Light continued. "Your species is unusual." "How so?" "Most species evolved for specific environments. We Vorthak developed our memory systems to survive on a world where information itself was a weapon. The Zephyrians evolved their hive minds on a planet where cooperation meant survival. The Deepers adapted to pressure that would crush most beings. Crystal that holds light settled onto her side of the room, light dancing through her transparent form. But humans, she continued, evolved on a world with many different environments. Hot deserts, frozen tundra, deep oceans, high mountains. Your ancestors survived by adapting to whatever they faced. I guess that makes sense, Sarah said. It makes you unpredictable, Crystal that holds light replied. That could be useful here. Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into her studies. The Academy's curriculum was intense. Morning classes covered military history spanning 50,000 years and dozens of civilizations. Afternoon sessions focused on strategy and tactics for environments ranging from asteroid fields to gas giant atmospheres. Sarah struggled at first. The Vorthak cadets absorbed information instantly. The Zephyrians worked through complex problems as a group mind. The Molten Ones never tired studying through the night cycles when others rested. But slowly, Sarah found her rhythm. She couldn't memorize entire textbooks like a Vorthak, but she could spot patterns that others missed. She couldn't coordinate with others like a Zephyrian, but she could adapt her thinking on the fly. She couldn't withstand extremes like a Molten One, but she could find ways to work around problems that seemed impossible. Her instructors began to notice. Professor Veltar, a spider-like being from the Silk Worlds, pulled her aside after a strategy class. Your approach to the Proxima campaign simulation was unconventional, the professor said, his 8 eyes studying her carefully. Did I do something wrong? Sarah asked. Wrong? No, you ignored the standard approach entirely. Instead of trying to match the enemy's strengths, you found weaknesses that our databases said did not exist. Professor Veltar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. The Crystalline Empire's standard tactic relies on perfect information flow. Our simulations always assume their communication networks are unbreakable, but you found a way to turn their strength against them. It just seemed logical, Sarah said. They depend so much on their network that disrupting it would cause chaos. Indeed. But the method you proposed should not have worked according to our models. Sarah felt a familiar confusion. This had happened before in other classes. She would suggest an approach that seemed obvious to her, only to be told it was impossible or had never been tried. Perhaps, Professor Veltar said, our models are incomplete. As the cycle progressed, Sarah found herself excelling in unexpected ways. In zero-gravity combat training, she outmaneuvered cadets from species that had evolved in space. In survival exercises, she thrived in environments that challenged even the most adapted species. Commander Srixtal began watching her more closely during training exercises. Sarah could feel those yellow eyes tracking her progress, but she couldn't read the expression on his reptilian features. The breaking point came during a complex multi-species coordination exercise. Teams of cadets from different species had to work together to solve a tactical problem. Sarah's team included a Vorthak, 2 Zephyrians, a Deeper, and a Molten One. The scenario was simple on the surface. Extract a hostage from a heavily defended position. But the details were fiendishly complex. The facility used adaptive defenses that learned from each attempt. The building itself shifted its layout every few minutes. Time was limited. Sarah's teammates immediately began analyzing the problem using their species' natural advantages. The Vorthak calculated probability matrices. The Zephyrians coordinated a perfect synchronized assault. The Deeper planned approaches through the facility's pressure systems. The Molten One prepared to burn through obstacles. All their plans failed in the simulation. Sarah watched the failed attempts, her mind working differently. She wasn't calculating probabilities or coordinating perfectly or analyzing pressures. She was looking at the problem as a whole, seeing it as something that could be changed rather than solved. What if we don't try to beat the defenses? She said during their planning session. Explain, requested the Vorthak. Every time we attack, the system learns and adapts. But what if we gave it the wrong lessons? What if we taught it to defend against attacks that aren't really attacks? Sarah outlined her plan. Instead of trying to overcome the facility's defenses, they would confuse them. They would run multiple fake operations, each one designed to teach the system false patterns. Then, when the defenses had adapted to expect certain behaviors, they would do something completely different. Her teammates were skeptical, but they tried it. The plan worked perfectly. The facility's adaptive systems, trained to expect conventional attacks, were completely unprepared for an approach that treated the Defenses themselves as a problem to be reprogrammed rather than defeated, Commander. Shrixtal appeared in their debrief session personally. Cadet Chen, he said, his voice carrying an odd tone. Your solution was creative. Thank you, sir. That was not necessarily a compliment. The commander's yellow eyes studied her intently. You have a tendency to ignore established tactical doctrine. I try to find what works, sir. What works? Commander Shrixtal repeated slowly. Indeed, tell me, Cadet Chen, what do you expect from the final examination? Sarah had been dreading this question. Every cadet knew about the final exam, but few details were public. It involved something called the reflex chamber, an ancient piece of technology that tested reaction times in ways that pushed cadets to their absolute limits. I expect to do my best. Sir? Your best. The commander clicked his claws against his scaled chin. Yes, I am curious to see what that might be. As the cycle drew to a close, Sarah felt the weight of expectations building around her. Her scores had steadily improved, but she knew she was still seen as the curiosity, the odd human who had somehow made it to the galaxy's most elite military academy. The night before the final examination, Crystal that holds light sat with her in their room, patterns of light swirling slowly through her transparent body. Are you nervous? The Vorthak asked. Terrified, Sarah admitted. Good. Fear can be useful if properly directed. Light danced faster through Crystal that holds light's form. I have been researching the reflex chamber. It is a precursor artifact built by the civilization that came before all of us. It has tested millions of beings over tens of thousands of years. Any advice? Do not try to be something you are not, Crystal that holds light said. The machine will test your limits. Let it find out what those limits actually are. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure what her limits actually were. That, she supposed, was what tomorrow would reveal. Outside their viewport, the stars wheeled slowly through space, ancient lights that had watched the rise and fall of civilizations. Tomorrow, one human would enter a machine built by beings who had vanished before her species had learned to make fire. Sarah, Shen fell asleep wondering what those ancient builders would think of the creature that evolution had produced on a small, blue world at the edge of the galaxy. The reflex chamber stood at the heart of Kepler Station like a monument to forgotten gods. Sarah stared at it through the observation window, trying to understand what she was seeing. The chamber itself was a perfect sphere, 30 meters across, made from a material that seemed to shift between metal and crystal depending on the angle of view. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with a soft blue light that hurt to look at directly. Precursor technology, Commander Shrixtal said, joining Sarah at the window. Built approximately 50,000 years ago by a civilization that vanished before the first member species of the Galactic Union had developed spaceflight. What happened to them? Sarah asked, unknown. They left behind only scattered artifacts like this one. Most are broken or inactive. This chamber is one of the few that still functions perfectly. Other cadets crowded around the observation deck, all staring at the ancient machine. Sarah noticed the tension in the air. Even the usually calm Vorthak showed signs of stress, their internal light patterns flickering more rapidly than normal. How does it work? Asked Zephyrian Cadet Hivemind 7 of 12, speaking for his linked group. Commander Shrixtal gestured toward the sphere. The chamber creates scenarios using what our scientists believe are quantum probability matrices. It places the subject in situations that test reaction time, decision-making, and adaptability. The scenarios become progressively more complex until the subject reaches their maximum capability. Has anyone ever broken it? Sarah found herself asking. The commander's scaled face showed what might have been amusement. Broken it? Cadet Chen. This machine has tested representatives of every known species in the galaxy. It has processed millions of individuals over thousands of years. The engineering tolerances built into precursor technology exceed anything our current civilization can produce. Sarah nodded, but something in the way the commander spoke made her think there was more to the story. However, Commander Shrixtal continued, there have been unusual results. The machine occasionally encounters individuals who perform in ways that exceed its programmed expectations. These cases are rare but documented. Professor Veltar joined them at the window, his 8 eyes reflecting the chamber's blue glow. The current Academy record is held by Cadet Mercury Quicksilver Flowing. a Quicksilver who achieved a reaction time of 0.0029 seconds in last cycle's examination. Sarah tried to imagine reacting to something in less than 0.03 of a second. It seemed impossible. Her own reflexes felt sluggish in comparison. Each species has evolved different capabilities, Professor Veltar explained. The Quicksilvers can literally think at the speed of their nerve impulses because they are made of liquid metal. The Void Dancers process information at quantum levels. The Crystal-born experience time differently than biological species. What about humans? Sarah asked. Professor Veltar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Humans are difficult to categorize. Your reaction times are average by galactic standards. Your processing speed is moderate. Your physical capabilities are unremarkable, yet your species consistently produces individuals who perform above predicted levels. Why? Unknown. Some theorists believe it has to do with your evolutionary history. Humans developed on a world with an unusual variety of challenges. Perhaps this created selection pressure for adaptability rather than specialization. The testing began at dawn the next day. Cadets entered the chamber one by one in order of their overall academy rankings. Sarah, as the lowest-ranked cadet, would go last. She watched through the observation windows as each species demonstrated their evolved advantages. The first Vorthak cadet entered the sphere, and the chamber's walls came alive with patterns of light. Through the monitoring systems, the observers could see the scenarios playing out inside. The Vorthak faced a series of information processing challenges. Streams of data flowed past at incredible speeds, and the cadet had to identify patterns and make decisions based on partial information. The crystalline being performed flawlessly, its perfect memory allowing it to track hundreds of variables simultaneously. Final score, 0.0156 seconds average reaction time. The Zephyrians went next, all entering the chamber together. The scenarios they faced required perfect coordination between multiple individuals. Attacks came from all directions simultaneously, requiring split-second communication and synchronized responses. The hive-mind cadets moved like parts of a single organism, their compound eyes tracking threats that would have overwhelmed individual consciousness. Final score, 0.089 seconds average reaction time. Each species brought their evolutionary advantages to bear on the ancient machine's challenges. The Deepers faced scenarios involving extreme pressure and environmental hazards. The Molten Ones worked through problems that would have incinerated most life forms. The Void Dancers navigated three-dimensional puzzles in zero gravity, all performed within expected parameters for their species. Then Cadet Mercury Quicksilver Flowing entered the chamber. Sarah pressed closer to the observation window. She had never seen a Quicksilver in action before. The being looked like liquid chrome poured into a roughly humanoid shape. As it moved, its body flowed and shifted, adapting to whatever the scenario required. The chamber created scenarios specifically designed for beings capable of changing their physical form. Passages that required flowing through narrow spaces. Challenges that demanded splitting into multiple smaller forms. Problems that could only be solved by becoming different shapes in rapid succession. Mercury Quicksilver Flowing excelled at every challenge. Its body responded faster than thought, reshaping itself in microseconds. When the chamber created barriers, the Quicksilver flowed around them. When it presented multiple threats, the being split into several forms to address each one simultaneously. Sarah watched the reaction time display climb higher and higher as the scenarios became more complex. 0.05 seconds, 0.04 seconds, 0.03 seconds. Finally, the chamber pushed beyond the Quicksilver's limits. In a scenario requiring the being to exist in 7 different shapes simultaneously, while processing information at quantum speeds, Mercury Quicksilver Flowing faltered. The liquid metal form shuddered, then held steady. Final score, 0.229 seconds average reaction time. A new Academy record. The observing cadets erupted in appreciation. Even members of competing species recognized the exceptional performance. Mercury Quicksilver Flowing flowed out of the chamber, its metallic surface rippling with satisfaction. Commander Srixtal nodded approvingly. Excellent work, Cadet. You have set a new standard for your species. The testing continued through the day. Each cadet performed within the expected range for their species, some exceeding their personal bests, but none approaching the Quicksilver's record. The chamber adapted to each being's capabilities, creating scenarios that pushed them to their limits without causing harm. As the sun set through the station's viewports, Sarah's turn finally arrived. She was the last cadet to be tested, and most of the observers had gone to dinner. Only a few instructors remained, along with Crystal that holds light and a handful of other cadets who had become friends during the cycle. Sarah approached the chamber's entrance, a circular opening that appeared in the sphere's surface when she drew near. The material felt warm under her hand, and she could sense vibrations running through it like a giant tuning fork. "Remember," Crystal that holds light called out, "do not try to be something you are not." Sarah nodded and stepped inside. The chamber sealed behind her with a sound like music. Inside, the walls glowed with the same blue light as the exterior, but softer and more welcoming. Sarah found herself standing in what appeared to be an empty room, though she knew the appearance was an illusion created by the chamber's systems. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the chamber began to probe. Sarah felt something like gentle fingers touching her mind, examining her thoughts and reflexes. The sensation wasn't invasive, more like being studied by a curious but benevolent intelligence. She realized the chamber was trying to understand what she was, how to test her properly. The probing continued for several minutes, much longer than it had taken for any other cadet. Through the observation windows, she could see the instructors leaning forward with interest. This was unusual. Finally, the chamber seemed to make a decision. The walls around Sarah shifted, and she found herself in a scenario that looked like a human city under attack. Buildings burned around her and civilians fled in panic. Her task was clear: evacuate as many people as possible before the attacking forces arrived. Sarah began moving, directing civilians toward evacuation routes, organizing rescue efforts, adapting her plans as the situation changed. The scenario was complex but manageable, designed for human-level capabilities. She completed it easily. The chamber paused, then tried again. This time the scenario was more complex. A space station under attack with multiple systems failing simultaneously. Sarah had to coordinate repairs, manage resources, and direct evacuations while under fire from enemy ships. Again, she adapted and succeeded. The chamber seemed puzzled. According to its databases, it should have found Sarah's limits by now. Humans were not supposed to be exceptional. They were average in most measurable ways, useful as generalists, but not outstanding in any particular area. The scenarios became more complex. Multi-dimensional puzzles that required thinking in ways that hurt her brain. Coordination challenges that demanded managing hundreds of variables simultaneously. Physical tests that pushed her reflexes to their absolute limits. Sarah kept adapting. When the puzzles became too complex for linear thinking, she found intuitive approaches. When the coordination became overwhelming, she learned to prioritize and delegate. When her reflexes weren't fast enough, she learned to anticipate. In the observation room, Commander Shrixtal leaned forward intently. "How long has she been in there?" Professor Veltar checked his instruments. 47 minutes. Most cadets complete the examination in 15 to 20 minutes. And her scores? Inconsistent. Sometimes average, sometimes exceptional. The chamber seems to be searching for something. Crystal that holds light's internal light patterns had accelerated dramatically. "She is not trying to beat the machine," the Vorthak observed. "She is trying to understand it." Inside the chamber, Sarah had indeed begun to sense the pattern behind the scenarios. The machine wasn't just testing her reflexes or her problem-solving ability. It was trying to find the edges of her capabilities, to map the boundaries of what she could become under pressure. But the boundaries kept moving. Each time the chamber thought it had found her limits, Sarah found a way to push past them. Not through superior speed or strength or intelligence, but through adaptation. She was learning from each scenario, not just how to solve similar problems, but how to approach the act of problem-solving itself. The chamber began to push harder. Scenarios designed for species with reaction times measured in microseconds. Challenges that required processing information at quantum speeds. Tests that assumed capabilities far beyond anything in the human genetic template. Sarah struggled with these, failing more often than succeeding. But she kept trying, kept adapting, kept learning, and slowly, impossibly, she began to improve at things that should have been utterly beyond human capability. The observers watched in growing amazement as Sarah's Performance began to approach levels that should have been impossible for her species. She wasn't faster than a Quicksilver or smarter than a Vorthak or more coordinated than a Zephyrian, but she was becoming something that could compete with them in their own areas of specialization. "This is unprecedented," Professor Veltar whispered. The chamber, meanwhile, had begun to exhibit signs of strain. Warning lights flickered on control panels. Temperature readings climbed as ancient systems worked harder than they had in centuries. Inside the sphere, Sarah faced a final scenario. She stood in what appeared to be the bridge of a massive starship under attack by an entire fleet. Every system was failing. The crew was gone. She was alone against impossible odds with nothing but her human adaptability and whatever she had learned in the past hour of testing. Sarah looked around the burning bridge, felt the ship shuddering under enemy fire, and smiled. "Was that fast enough?" she asked the ancient machine. The chamber answered with a sound like reality breaking. The moment Sarah stepped into the reflex chamber, she knew something was different. The machine felt confused, like a computer trying to run a program it had never seen before. The gentle probing lasted much longer than it had for any other cadet, and Sarah could sense the ancient systems working hard to understand what she was. Through the observation windows, the watching instructors began to murmur among themselves. Professor Veltar checked his readings twice, then called up the historical database. In 50,000 years of operation, the chamber has never taken more than 30 seconds to initialize a test, he said quietly to Commander Srixtal. It has been trying to categorize Cadet Chen for nearly 4 minutes, the commander's yellow eyes fixed on the sphere. Perhaps our human cadet is more interesting than we assumed. Inside the chamber, Sarah felt the probing finally end. The machine had apparently made some kind of decision about how to test her. The walls around her shifted, and she found herself standing in a recreation of New Tokyo during the Martian colonial wars. Buildings stretched up around her in gleaming towers, but smoke and fire marked where enemy forces had struck. This was a test designed for humans. Sarah recognized the historical scenario from her academy studies. The challenge was clear: coordinate the evacuation of civilians while enemy forces approached the city. She had a limited time and resources, and every decision would affect how many lives she could save. Sarah moved through the scenario with practiced ease. She had studied this exact battle in her military history classes. She directed civilians to evacuation points, coordinated with emergency services, and organized defensive positions to buy time for the escape. The test was complex enough to challenge her, but well within human capabilities. When she completed it successfully, the chamber paused. Sarah could feel its confusion through the subtle vibrations in the walls. According to its databases, that scenario should have pushed her close to her limits. Instead, she had handled it comfortably. The machine tried again. This time, Sarah found herself on the bridge of a damaged starship. Multiple systems were failing, the crew was injured, and enemy ships were closing in. She had to coordinate repairs, manage life support, and plan tactical responses while time ran out. Sarah adapted quickly to the new challenge. She prioritized the most critical systems, organized repair teams from the available crew, and found creative solutions when standard procedures failed. When the enemy ships arrived, she was ready with tactics that used the ship's damaged condition as an advantage rather than a weakness. Again, she succeeded comfortably. The chamber's confusion was growing stronger. Sarah could sense it in the way the walls flickered and the slight delays between scenarios. The machine had expected to find her limits by now. Humans were supposed to be average, useful as generalists but not exceptional in any particular area. But Sarah kept exceeding the expectations programmed into the ancient system. The scenarios became more complex. The machine stopped using purely human-oriented tests and began adapting challenges designed for other species. Sarah found herself trying to process information at Vorthak speeds, coordinate actions with Zephyrian precision, and work under deeper-level pressure. She struggled with these new challenges, failing more often than succeeding. But something strange was happening. Each failure taught her something new, and she began to adapt in ways that shouldn't have been possible. When faced with information processing challenges designed for crystal-based minds, Sarah couldn't match their perfect memory or calculation speed, but she found patterns in the data that the test hadn't expected her to see. She used intuition where logic failed, making leaps of understanding that bypassed the need for exhaustive analysis. When confronted with coordination problems designed for hive minds, Sarah couldn't achieve their perfect synchronization, but she learned to anticipate, to predict what coordinated action would be needed and prepare for it in advance. She couldn't match their unity, but she could achieve similar results through planning and adaptability. The observers outside were watching with growing amazement. Sarah had been in the chamber for over an hour now, far longer than any cadet in Academy history. Her performance readings jumped erratically between average and exceptional, showing a pattern no one had ever seen before. "She's learning," Crystal that holds light said suddenly, her crystalline form blazing with excited light patterns. "Look at the progression. Each scenario is teaching her something new, and she's applying those lessons to the next challenge." Professor Veltar studied his instruments. "That should be impossible. The chamber is designed to test existing capabilities, not to train new ones. The scenarios are presented too quickly for normal learning to occur." "Perhaps normal learning isn't what we're seeing," Commander Srixtal observed. Inside the chamber, Sarah had begun to understand what was happening to her. The machine wasn't just testing her reflexes or problem-solving ability. It was exploring the very nature of human adaptability, pushing her to discover capabilities she never knew she had. Each new scenario forced her to think differently, to approach problems from angles she had never considered. When brute force processing failed, she learned to think sideways. When direct action didn't work, she found indirect approaches. When her natural abilities weren't enough, she learned to use the environment itself as a tool. The chamber began to present scenarios that should have been impossible for any biological being to handle. Tests designed for artificial intelligences, challenges that required quantum-level thinking, problems that assumed capabilities far beyond anything in the human genetic template. Sarah failed most of these spectacular challenges, but she kept trying. And slowly, impossibly, she began to succeed at things that should have been utterly beyond her. The machine's strain was becoming apparent. Warning lights flashed on monitoring panels throughout the observation room. Temperature alarms began to sound as ancient cooling systems struggled to handle the unexpected load. "The chamber is operating beyond normal parameters," Professor Veltar reported, his voice tight with concern. "Some systems are approaching critical levels." Commander Srixtal moved to the emergency controls. "Should we abort the test?" Before anyone could answer, Crystal that holds light spoke up. "Look at the readings. The chamber isn't malfunctioning. It's adapting." All eyes turned to the displays. The ancient machine's behavior patterns were indeed changing. Systems that had operated in the same way for 50,000 years were now working differently, trying new approaches to test the human cadet. "It's learning from her," Professor Veltar said in amazement. "Somehow she's teaching a precursor artifact new ways to function." Inside the chamber, Sarah faced increasingly complex scenarios. She found herself in command situations that required managing resources across multiple star systems. She handled diplomatic crises between species that thought in completely different ways. She solved engineering problems that involved technologies beyond current galactic science. With each challenge, she adapted further. Her thinking became more flexible, her responses more creative. She learned to see problems not as fixed obstacles to overcome, but as situations that could be changed, redirected, or transformed entirely. The chamber seemed to be running out of standard tests. The scenarios became more abstract, more theoretical. Sarah found herself in pure information spaces, dealing with mathematical concepts that existed only as flowing patterns of data. She navigated probability mazes where every choice created new possible futures. She solved puzzles that required thinking in dimensions her brain wasn't designed to comprehend. Somehow, she kept adapting. The ancient machine was now operating at levels it had never reached before. Cooling systems that had been adequate for millennia were overheating. Processing cores that had handled every known form of consciousness were struggling to keep up with the demands of testing this one human cadet. I'm reading microfractures in the chamber's primary matrix, Professor Veltar reported, his voice filled with disbelief. The quantum processors are operating at 127% of their design capacity. Commander Srixtal leaned forward intently. "How is that possible?" "Unknown. The chamber appears to be evolving its testing protocols in real time. It's trying to find this human's limits, but every time it thinks it has found them, she adapts to a higher level. Sarah, meanwhile, had begun to sense the machine's struggle. Through the walls of the chamber, she could feel the strain in its ancient systems. The tests were coming faster now, more complex, more demanding. The machine was pushing itself to its absolute limits, trying to find hers. But the limits kept moving. Sarah realized she was no longer just adapting to the tests. She was adapting to the process of adaptation itself. Each challenge didn't just teach her how to solve similar problems. It taught her how to become the kind of person who could solve any problem. The final scenario materialized around her. Sarah found herself on the bridge of a massive starship alone, facing an entire enemy fleet. Every system was failing. The crew was gone. Enemy fire tore through the hull around her. By any reasonable measure, the situation was hopeless. Sarah looked around the burning bridge, felt the ship shuddering under impossible punishment, and smiled. This wasn't a test of her reflexes or her intelligence or her training. This was a test of her humanity, of the quality that had let her species survive everything their chaotic world had thrown at them, of the refusal to accept that something couldn't be done. Was that fast enough? She asked the ancient machine. The chamber's response was immediate and catastrophic. Every warning alarm in the observation room screamed at once. The sphere's surface, which had glowed with steady blue light for 50,000 years, began to flicker wildly. Sparks erupted from control panels as systems overloaded. The sound that emerged from the chamber was like reality itself, breaking. A deep resonant crack that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ancient material of the sphere, harder than diamond and more durable than neutronium, developed a network of hair-thin fractures. Inside the chamber, Sarah felt the machine's ancient consciousness touch her mind one last time. For a brief moment, she sensed its bewilderment, its amazement, and something that might have been approval. Then the connection severed as emergency systems shut down the chamber to prevent total failure. The sphere went dark for the first time in 50 millennia. In the sudden silence, Sarah heard only the sound of cooling metal and the whispered conversations of amazed observers. She stood in the center of the dead chamber, human and unchanged, but somehow fundamentally different than she had been an hour before. The entrance opened with a grinding sound, and Sarah stepped out into a room full of staring aliens. Every eye, sensor, and optical cluster was focused on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. Commander Srixtal approached slowly, his reptilian features unreadable. "Cadet Chen," he said carefully, "you appear to have broken a machine that has operated without failure for 50,000 years." Sarah looked back at the now dark sphere, at the fracture lines spiderwebbing across its ancient surface, at the smoke rising from overloaded systems. "Was that fast enough?" she asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge to the entire galaxy. Sarah stood in the center of the broken chamber, surrounded by silence so complete that she could hear her own heartbeat. Smoke drifted from overloaded systems, and the blue glow that had lit the sphere for 50,000 years was gone. The fracture lines spreading across the ancient material looked like lightning frozen in crystal. Commander Srixtal stepped forward, his scaled face showing an expression Sarah had never seen before. The reptilian officer's usual confident bearing was replaced by something that looked almost like fear. "In 50,000 years, he said slowly, no being has ever caused the reflex chamber to shut down. The precursors built it to test any form of consciousness the galaxy might produce. It has examined artificial intelligences, hive minds, and beings made of pure energy. Nothing has ever pushed it beyond its operational limits." Professor Veltar moved to the emergency control panels, his 8 eyes scanning the damage reports scrolling across the screens. "The quantum processors are burned out," he reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "The probability matrices have collapsed. The primary reality generation system has suffered cascading failures across 17 different subsystems." "Can it be repaired?" asked Crystal that holds light, her crystalline form dim with concern. "Unknown. We don't understand precursor technology well enough to fix it when it breaks. This chamber has always maintained itself. We've never needed repair protocols because nothing has ever damaged it before." Sarah looked around at the assembled beings, all staring at her with mixtures of amazement, fear, and confusion. She felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to break anything." Commander Srixtal's laugh was sharp and bitter. apologizing for exceeding the design limits of a machine built by the most advanced civilization in galactic history. How perfectly human. What happens now? Sarah asked. Before anyone could answer, emergency alarms began sounding throughout the station. Through the observation windows, Sarah could see ships launching from the military docks, their running lights cutting through the star field like angry fireflies. What's going on? Crystal that holds light asked. Professor Veltar was working frantically at his control panels. I'm reading massive energy signatures from the chamber. The shutdown wasn't clean. Something in the quantum matrix is still active, and it's broadcasting on frequencies we've never seen before. Commander Srixtal moved to the tactical displays. All ships are reporting anomalous readings. The chamber's quantum field is expanding beyond the station. As if summoned by his words, Admiral Thezkoran materialized in the observation room via emergency transport. The ancient void dancer hung in the air like a living shadow, her form barely solid enough to see. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Explain, she said simply. Commander Srixtal gestured toward Sarah. Human Cadet Chen has apparently caused a critical failure in the reflex chamber. The extent of the damage is still being assessed. Admiral Thezkoran turned her attention to Sarah, and for a moment Sarah felt like she was being examined by something vast and incomprehensible. The Void Dancer species existed partially outside normal space-time, experiencing reality from perspectives that most beings couldn't imagine. Show me, the Admiral commanded. Professor Veltar activated the chamber's recording systems, projecting a holographic replay of Sarah's test. The assembled beings watched in silence as the human cadet worked through scenarios of increasing complexity, adapting and learning at speeds that should have been impossible. They watched as the ancient machine began to strain, pushing itself beyond its design limits in an attempt to find the human's boundaries. They saw Sarah's performance climb from average to exceptional to utterly unprecedented, and they watched the moment when she asked her question and the chamber broke. Admiral Thezkoran studied the replay for several minutes, her shadowy form shifting through dimensions that hurt to look at directly. Fascinating, she said finally. The chamber was not damaged by the human's performance. It was transformed by it. Transformed? Commander Srixtal asked. The machine was designed to test the limits of consciousness, the Admiral explained. But this human has no fixed limits. She is pure adaptability given form. The chamber tried to map her capabilities and found itself mapping infinity instead. Professor Veltar looked up from his instruments. Are you saying the chamber evolved during the test? In a sense, yes. It encountered a form of consciousness it had never been designed to handle. A mind that refuses to accept limitations. The machine learned from her just as she learned from it. But the learning process exceeded its ability to adapt. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean for the galaxy? Admiral Thezkoran's attention focused on her again, and Sarah felt layers of meaning in that alien gaze that she couldn't quite grasp. It means, human Cadet Chen, that you have just demonstrated why your species terrifies so many others. You have shown that humans are not bound by the same rules that govern the rest of us. I don't understand. Every other species in the galaxy evolved for specific environments, developed particular advantages, reached certain limits. We are what we are, and we cannot become fundamentally different. But humans... The Admiral's form flickered through several dimensions. Humans can become anything. The emergency alarms continued to wail as more ships launched from the station. Through the windows, Sarah could see the expanding quantum field from the broken chamber, creating ripples in space itself, like stones thrown into a cosmic pond. The field is still growing, Professor Veltar reported. It's now encompassing a sphere nearly 1,000 kilometers in diameter. Ships are reporting navigation anomalies. What kind of anomalies? Commander Srixtal demanded. Impossible ones. Pilots are experiencing time dilation effects. Some are reporting that their instruments are showing multiple possible futures simultaneously. A few ships claim their crews are having enhanced reaction times. Admiral Thezkoran moved closer to the observation windows, her form becoming more solid as she concentrated. The chamber's quantum matrix is still processing the human's test. It's trying to complete an analysis that can never be completed, because the subject has no fixed parameters to analyze. Crystal that holds light's internal light patterns were flashing rapidly. Is the field dangerous? Unknown. But it's definitely affecting consciousness in unexpected ways. Some of the ship's crews are reporting enhanced capabilities. Others are experiencing confusion as their minds try to process information they're not equipped to handle. Sarah moved to the window and stared out at the expanding field of warped space. This is my fault. I need to fix it. How? Commander Shrixtel asked. Sarah looked back at the broken chamber. The same way I broke it, by adapting. Before anyone could stop her, Sarah walked back toward the chamber's entrance. The opening had sealed when the machine shut down, but as she approached, it began to iris open again. Blue light flickered weakly around the edges. Cadet Chen, stop, Commander Shrixtel ordered. The chamber is unstable. Entering it now could be fatal. Sarah paused at the threshold. And if I don't, the quantum field keeps expanding until it affects the entire galaxy. How many ships are out there? How many crews are experiencing effects they can't handle? The chamber is broken, Professor Veltar protested. You can't test against a machine that no longer functions properly. Maybe that's exactly what I need to do, Sarah said. Maybe the test isn't finished yet. Admiral Thesakoran drifted closer. Explain your reasoning, human. Sarah turned to face the assembled beings. The chamber broke because it tried to find my limits and couldn't. But maybe that's not the real test. Maybe the real test is what happens when you realize that limits are just suggestions. That's insane, Commander Shrixtel said. No, Sarah replied. That's human. She stepped into the chamber before anyone could stop her. Inside, the environment was chaos. The walls flickered between different realities, showing fragments of all the scenarios Sarah had faced during her test. Past, present, and possible futures overlapped in impossible ways. The quantum matrix was stuck in a feedback loop, trying to process an equation with no solution. Sarah could feel the machine's confusion, its desperate attempt to categorize something that couldn't be categorized. The ancient intelligence built into the chamber was experiencing something like panic, as it encountered a problem it couldn't solve. I know what you're trying to do, Sarah said to the chamber. You're trying to find where I end, where my capabilities stop, where my potential reaches its limit. But that's not how humans work. The flickering walls responded to her voice, the chaotic patterns beginning to stabilize slightly. We don't have limits, Sarah continued. We have current capabilities. And the gap between what we can do now and what we might do tomorrow is where we live. That's what makes us human. The chamber's ancient systems processed her words, and Sarah felt something like understanding beginning to dawn in the machine's consciousness. You want to test me? Then test that. Test the space between what I am and what I could become. Test the human refusal to accept that something can't be done. The chaos around her began to settle into new patterns. The chamber was learning, adapting, evolving. Instead of trying to find her limits, it was learning to test her limitlessness. Outside, the expanding quantum field began to stabilize. Ships reported that the anomalous effects were lessening, though many crews found that they retained some of the enhanced capabilities they had experienced. Inside the chamber, Sarah faced a new kind of test. Not scenarios designed to find her breaking point, but challenges designed to explore her adaptability itself. The machine learned to test not what she could do, but what she could become. And for the first time in 50,000 years, the reflex chamber began to understand what it truly meant to be unlimited. The blue light returned to the chamber's walls, but it was different now, warmer, more alive. The ancient machine had learned something new about consciousness, about potential, about the terrifying and wonderful nature of beings who refused to accept that anything was impossible. When Sarah finally emerged from the chamber, she found a crowd of observers waiting for her. Admiral Thesakoran hung in the air nearby, her shadowy form rippling with what might have been approval. Well? Commander Shrixtel asked. Sarah looked back at the chamber, which now glowed with a steady, healthy light. The fractures in its surface had sealed themselves, and the quantum field had stabilized at a manageable size. I think, she said, we reached an understanding. And your test results? Professor Veltar asked. Sarah smiled. Unmeasurable. Which, according to the chamber, is exactly what they should be. In the databanks of the ancient machine, a new category had been created for the first time in 50 millennia, adaptive potential, infinite. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within days of Sarah's test, every military academy, research station, and government center had received the reports. A human cadet had broken a precursor artifact simply by refusing to accept its limitations. The ancient reflex chamber, unchanged for 50,000 years, had been forced to evolve or be destroyed. The implications terrified some species and fascinated others. Sarah sat in Admiral Thez Corin's office, watching the reactions stream in from across known space. The Void Dancer's headquarters existed partially outside normal dimensions, giving it windows that looked out onto probability streams and possible futures. The crystalline hegemony has suspended all human admissions to their military programs, Admiral Thez Corin reported, her shadowy form flickering between dimensions. They cite unpredictable adaptation patterns as a security risk. And the others? Sarah asked. The Silicon Collective wants to study you. The Hive Worlds have put in a formal request for human military advisors. The Plasma Kingdoms are offering technology exchanges for access to human training methods. Through the strange windows, Sarah could see probability streams flowing like cosmic rivers. In some futures, humanity rose to lead galactic civilization. In others, they were feared and isolated. In still others, they triggered changes that transformed the very nature of consciousness itself. What do you see out there? Sarah asked. Admiral Thez Corin's attention focused on the probability streams. Chaos, potential, transformation. Your species has always been unpredictable, but now the galaxy knows why. You have shown them that adaptation without limits is possible. Is that good or bad? It simply is. The question now is what the galaxy chooses to do with this knowledge. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Commander Srixtal's reptilian features appeared on the communication screen, his expression more serious than Sarah had ever seen it. Admiral, we have a situation. 3 more human cadets have just completed the modified reflex chamber tests at academies on distant worlds. All 3 achieved results classified as adaptive potential, unmeasurable. Admiral Thez Corin's form solidified slightly. Described the tests. Similar patterns to Cadet Chen's examination. Initial average performance followed by rapid adaptation and system evolution. 2 of the chambers had to be temporarily shut down for recalibration. The third, Commander Srixtal paused. The third chamber appears to have developed what our technicians are calling enhanced learning protocols. It's now testing other species more effectively than ever before. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. The chambers are learning from us. Indeed, Admiral Thez Corin confirmed. Precursor technology is adapting to accommodate human consciousness. This has never happened before. Over the following weeks, more reports arrived. Human cadets across the galaxy were breaking testing equipment, forcing ancient machines to evolve, and achieving results that redefined what the various species thought was possible. But it wasn't just the machines that were changing. Look at this data, Professor Veltar said, his 8 eyes scanning holographic displays in the Academy's research center. Human performance metrics are showing unprecedented improvement galaxy-wide. Not just the cadets who broke the chambers, but all humans in high-stress training environments. Sarah studied the data streams. It's like we're learning from each other's adaptations, even across interstellar distances. The quantum entanglement effects from the modified chambers may be creating some kind of species-wide enhancement network, Professor Veltar theorized. When one human pushes past a barrier, it somehow makes it easier for others to do the same. Crystal that holds light joined them at the research station, her crystalline form blazing with excited light patterns. I have been studying the historical records. This explains many previously inexplicable human achievements, such as, Sarah asked, your species' rapid technological advancement, the way human explorers consistently survived in environments that should have killed them, the tendency for human military units to achieve victories despite being outnumbered and outgunned. You are already doing this, but on a smaller scale. Doing what? Refusing to accept limitations. Adapting beyond what should be possible. Teaching reality itself to accommodate human determination. Admiral Thez Corin's voice echoed through the research center as she materialized nearby. The Galactic Council has called an emergency session. They want to discuss the human question. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. That doesn't sound good. Representative Quartz Song Eternal of the Crystal Singers has proposed limiting human access to advanced technology. Ambassador Deep Current Strong of the Pressure Worlds wants to establish monitoring protocols for human populations. Several other species are supporting various restriction measures. Because we're too adaptable. Because you're unpredictable. Most species can model human behavior to some degree, but your adaptability makes long-term predictions impossible. This makes some civilizations very nervous. Commander Shrixtal entered the research center, his expression grim. We've received word from Earth. Human governments are demanding explanations for why their citizens are suddenly developing enhanced capabilities. Some are claiming it's evidence of alien experimentation on human populations. And the truth? Sarah asked. The truth is that humans were always capable of this level of adaptation. The testing simply revealed it. But try explaining that to a species that has never experienced fundamental change in their capabilities. Admiral Thesakorin gestured toward the probability streams visible through her dimensional windows. The situation is becoming unstable. Some species are calling for isolation protocols. Others want to weaponize human adaptability. A few are considering preemptive action. Against humanity, Sarah asked. Against the potential for uncontrolled change that humanity represents. Sarah looked around the research center at the alien beings who had become her friends and mentors. What do you think I should do? Professor Veltar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps the question is not what you should do, but what you can become. I don't understand. Crystal that holds lightest light patterns shifted to a calmer configuration. You have shown that humans can adapt beyond any predefined limits. But adaptation is not just about individual capability. It is also about finding new ways to coexist. Admiral Thesakorin nodded, her form rippling through dimensions of possibility. The galaxy faces a choice. It can fear human potential and try to contain it, or it can learn from it and grow. But how do we convince them to choose growth over fear? By showing them what human adaptability looks like when it's focused on cooperation rather than competition, Commander Shrixtal suggested. Sarah thought about this as she returned to her quarters that evening. Through her viewport, she could see ships from dozens of worlds docked at Kepler Station. Each species had evolved to excel in their particular environments, but they had also learned to work together despite their differences. Maybe that was the real test. The next morning, Sarah requested permission to address the Galactic Council. The request was denied, so she requested permission to address the Academy's multinational student body. That was also denied. Finally, she simply walked to the main assembly hall during the dinner hour and began speaking.